Greetings, my fellow YouTubians. One of the individuals who entered my consecutive contest that I held back in October is jakesbikini, and when he wasn't one of the initial 5 people that I picked for that contest, he was voted into the bonus round. So this is a video that I've owed for a few weeks now. jakesbikini asked me to do a review of Sherlock Holmes, directed by Guy Ritchie, which is a movie that came out in about a year ago, late 2009. But one that I didn't I wasn't all that interested in seeing in the theater when it came out. And one of the primary reasons for that is because they cast an American as Sherlock Holmes. Now, granted, this particular American happens to be Robert Downey Jr., who is a terrific actor. But I'm just wondering why they needed apparently a big-name movie star that badly to justify, I guess, the budget, and they couldn't cast a British individual to play Sherlock Holmes, who is, of course, a classic British literary character by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sherlock Holmes is an incredibly intelligent individual who has a vast knowledge of all kinds of obscure facts from in all sorts of various fields of study. And he uses all this information stored in that incredible noggin of his to solve crimes using the most obscure clues that you could possibly come across. Downey is, of course, assisted by his faithful companion and assistant, Dr. John Watson, who's played by Jude Law, who happens to be British. Don't you think maybe he could have played Sherlock Holmes, or maybe they could have gotten Hugh Grant or somebody? I don't know. Yeah, Downey, of course, is lots of fun. Yeah, I wasn't all that pleased by the fact that the actor's American. Of course, he can do a British accent. I know that, but you know, and it is acting after all. I don't really know what I'm complaining about. Well, the other thing that I'm complaining about is the fact that since this movie was directed by Guy Ritchie and produced by Joel Silver, they turned Sherlock Holmes into an action hero. A guy who gets into fistfights and has to dodge explosions and stuff like that. And for some reason, the both of them carry around pistols. I don't really know why they do that. They're investigating, you know, crimes and stuff like that, but they're not cops. You'd think that maybe if they were in danger and had to defend themselves, they might pick up a gun somewhere. That's usually what happens in action movies. Someone drops a gun and somebody else picks it up and uses it. But no, these guys actually carry their own revolvers around. I don't really, yeah, I guess, you know, the world that they live in was a particularly brutal one. Anyway, of course, this story takes place in London in the late 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. And their nemesis is a character by the name of Lord Blackwell, who has recently been jailed, convicted, and executed, and only after that did he rise from the dead and continue his reign of terror over London. A lot of people are saying the guy's got supernatural ability. This is what he's claimed all along. He has the power of Satan or something like that. And Sherlock kind of says, well, I think there's a more rational scientific explanation for him being able to do all the stuff that he does. One example of a type of scene that I found quite enjoyable was one where he stands around and says, well, because I've discovered this, this, and this, all these little obscure details from, you know, like 6 scenes back, I can conclude such and such. And he goes on and surprises everyone with all the information he's able to discover based on these very obscure clues. And in that case, he sort of leaves me and probably a lot of other viewers in the dust, because there's no way that we can, you know, conclude from him walking around somebody's apartment looking at a frog stuck on a spike, oh, this is whatever genus frog from Africa or something like that, and that means that it carries a particular enzyme that is good for this property and conducting this type of experiment. You know, I mean, there's just there's just no way for anybody to really to keep up with that. I mean, you can keep up with how he's explaining it, but it's all sort of like, oh, okay. It's just like it seems more like he's pulling stuff out of thin air. Though that's not the case. It's not supposed to be the case in the context of the story. It's still a little frustrating to kind of just sit there and go, okay, all right, you know, there's no way that I could have figured that out. You know, some mysteries you can actually figure out if you have enough information to kind of understand what's happening. And figure out who the culprit is, or at least how the crime was committed, based on what you've seen, but there's just no way to do that in a movie like Sherlock Holmes, because the information and the details as to how the crime is pulled off are from such obscure places that you sort of need someone there to explain to you how everything works, kind of like Inception. Because, you know, the the basis for it all is just so remote. Rachel McAdams is also in this movie. She's an American. She is a former acquaintance of Holmes, who apparently is just as smart as he is, and is good at picking people's pockets, I think. I can't remember the name of the character. She's also in the novels, from what I understand. This shows you how cultured I am. I actually haven't read a Sherlock Holmes novel, but I do know that one of the most famous adventures is The Hound of the Baskervilles. And I also know that what didn't happen was Sherlock Holmes and John Watson meeting in boarding school, as depicted in one of my favorite movies from the 80s, Young Sherlock Holmes, in which they take on a cult. And that involved basically the nemesis turned out to be one of Holmes's professors at his school, who later on checks into a hotel under the alias of Moriarty, so that's where you get Moriarty from, apparently. Moriarty is supposed to be in the second Sherlock Holmes movie, which is due out next year. Jared Harris will be playing him, and also Noomi Rapace from the Swedish Stieg Larsson films will be in it as well, from what I've read. So yes, there was a lot of exposition at the end, even more so than in The Prestige, which you know, I'm sort of, you know, reminded of that movie by this one, in which Holmes basically just stands around and explains absolutely everything, so that nobody really has to do any work figuring stuff out. And how could we? How could we figure out anything that's happened, because of the information that he uses is just, you know, so far-reaching from all kinds of different fields of study, as to make it impossible for anyone other than Holmes to figure out what's really going on. I like Jude Law a lot. I think Jude Law is a lot of fun, and he gives as good as he gets when it comes to arguing with Holmes. I think my favorite part of the whole movie is where they're investigating this guy right before the big fight with the giant. Jude Law is conducting some sort of little experiment with ink. There's some burned paper, and he's trying to figure out what was written on the paper before it was burned. And as Downey is walking around observing the artifacts, all the different little experiments in this guy's lab, Jude Law is kind of like shaking a little, you know, liquid up, getting ready to do with this. And he looks over and sees Holmes and just kind of smiles, because he knows that the bad guys don't stand a chance of covering up whatever it is they're up to while Holmes is on the case. He can figure out absolutely anything. So that's kind of a cool little moment, just a kind of a throwaway moment, but I enjoyed that. And I like Downey a lot too. Obviously, since he's been in Iron Man, he's a big star now, and that is what they needed for a movie like this. But it was produced by Joel Silver, who did the Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, and Matrix movies, which means that it has more of an action movie sensibility than what you'd normally expect from a Sherlock Holmes story. Although I have to say, young Sherlock Holmes did have its fair share of action as well. There's a lot of fencing at the end of that movie, a lot of fighting with swords. So all in all, I didn't hate this movie, but I didn't really love it either. I'll probably end up seeing the second one, but I'm not really rushing out to see it or anything like that. Guy Ritchie is a movie, excuse me, Guy Ritchie is a director that I'm familiar with, but I haven't seen a lot of his films. The one movie of his that I really like is Snatch, which has Jason Statham and Dennis Farina and Brad Pitt in it, and has a number of different storylines going on. They're a lot of fun. His last movie before Sherlock Holmes was Rock'n'Rolla, with Tandy Newton and Gerard Butler, but I never saw that. I might see it one day, but it's not something I'm rushing out to see. So sorry I'm not more enthusiastic about this movie. Sorry I don't have more interesting things to say about it. It would be a movie that I would enjoy seeing probably twice in a row, but in this case I didn't. I saw it the one time, and though I backed up a few scenes and watched them again just because some of the monologues are so funny, yeah, not really a keeper for me. But thanks very much for watching. I appreciate you entering the contest and what have you. This is your prize video, such as it is. Thanks again. Take it easy.